Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a night of spine-tingling terror. Tonight, we journey deep into the heart of the wilderness to share some of the most horrifying tales ever told. Prepare yourself for a night of fear and suspense as we uncover the dark secrets lurking in the shadows. So pitch your tents, gather close, and let the nightmares begin.
Truly, I wonder if there was some sort of portal or something there, because we had so many crazy paranormal events happen. Pretty much anything you can think of happened. I'd hear my mum call for me, but I was home alone, or she never did call for me. Footsteps walking up the stairs and down the hall, while everyone else was in bed. Shadow people, you name it. Some events were more terrifying than others, however. There was this one girl we affectionately called Ice Cream Girl, and how she got the name I couldn't tell you honestly. She was a ghost around 10 years old, with long, straight brown hair, a blue skirt just like the one I wore, and a white shirt. She had the strongest, most uncomfortable feel to her. You'd know she was there before you saw her, and you'd get the hairs on your neck and a chill down your spine, and the worst someone's watching me feeling ever. She especially liked lurking in my mother's closet, or by her dresser, or in the living room in the darker hours as you tried to race up the stairs to get away. Luckily, she wasn't much of a threat, but was super uncomfortable to be around. Another odd event is when I was 15 years old, and when everyone was gone at work or out doing other things, I'd hear footsteps downstairs. It first started actually as I heard the front door handle jiggle, like you're trying to open it repeatedly. I saw no cars in the driveway and creeped down the hall to spy. For context, there was a window directly next to the front door, and from the hallway I could look down and out that window. So that's what I was aiming to do. As soon as it got in view, the noise stopped, and no one was there. The next day it sounded like footsteps. Again, no one was home, and I went downstairs into the kitchen to go looking, since that's where I heard them, by the garage door in the kitchen. The floor there made a particular creaky pop, so it was easy to know where it was. As soon as I was rounding the corner, the steps stopped, but then it started to come towards me. I bolted upstairs, shut my door, and didn't come out until my mum got home later. Then, maybe 2 days later, I heard the garbage door slam shut, and again those footsteps by the door. I wasn't in a sociable mood and ignored it, thinking my stepdad got home. That is about 10 minutes later, I heard his truck pull up in the driveway. It went on like that for about a month until it suddenly stopped. I also have a very vivid memory of what I called a black panther in our home when I was a small child. I was about 5 and woke up early feeling very hungry. I don't remember the exact time, but it was around 4 or 5 a.m. and still dark out. I got my little self out of bed and opened my bedroom door and saw my mum was already up. I could see the glow of the kitchen light on at the end of the hallway and her voice in the kitchen talking to my grandma, who was staying with us at the time. So I wandered down the hall to go ask for some toast, my favorite breakfast food at the time. The moment I took my first step down the stairs, I got a horrible feeling of someone or something behind me. I froze and then turned around to face the guest bedroom. In it was this black giant cat, the Black Panther, with 2 yellow glowing eyes and no pupils staring back at me. I froze solid, scared and unsure of what to do. I contemplated running down to the safety of my mum and getting my delicious toast, but was certain that if I did that, this big cat would chase me and hurt me, because I could get to her. I slowly stepped back up off the stair step, and it blinked at me but otherwise did not move. I made up my mind and bolted for the bedroom and shut the door quickly behind me. I sighed with relief, having made it safely, and got on the ground to peek out of the little gap between the door and floor. I was relieved to see it did not follow. That was until I saw its big, black head peek out around the corner of the guest room and its paw stepped out. I knew somehow that it could see me staring at it, and I ran into the bedroom and hid under the covers. Later that day, my mum asked me and my brother, who ran down the hall early that morning, and I recounted my horrible story of the panther, and even took my mum upstairs to show where I had seen it and how it peeked around the corner at me. She reassured me that it might be our pet cat Cosmo, to which I replied that it simply couldn't be. It had no pupils, it was much bigger than our cat, and the face structure was all wrong. I knew what I saw, but I'm not sure she entirely believed me. My brother suggested it was my grandma's suitcase that was black with a yellow tag, and near the location that I saw this cat at. The tag was not reflective nor the right shape, and it had 2 eyes, not 1. Plus, that wouldn't explain me seeing it peek around the corner or its body shape. I could also see it was to the side of the suitcase when it stood there. Still a mystery to this day. My 2.5-year-old son keeps mentioning that he sees a ghost, and it's been almost daily, every night for the last 2 weeks in our new house. My fiancée is 26 and so am I. The first time this happened was on the first night after moving to our new house in Illinois. We moved only about 10 minutes away from our previous home. The house was built in 2008, and as far as everyone's aware, there have been no deaths here. He also never said this at our old place before we moved here. I was putting my little man down in his crib for the night, and like I've done every single night for over a year, I said goodnight to all of his stuffed toys in the room, and then to him and kissed him on his hand, something he's had me do for a long time now. As I walked to the door to leave the room, I walked outside of his room, turned around and looked at him with the door opened and said, "Good night, love you, son," like I do every night. Now, instead of him saying, "Night, night, love you too," like he always does, he was simply lying on his back, pointing to the corner of his room, and then he said very clearly, "Ghost." I was like, did I hear that right? So I asked, "What did you say, bud?" And he replied, "Ghost. In my room." He didn't seem scared or shocked, but to be honest, I was a little weirded out and said, "You're okay, bud? Where?" He pointed to the corner again and said ghost. I told him not to worry about it and try and get some sleep, and said good night and told him I loved him again. Then he repeated it, "Ghost," and looked at me and said, "I love you, Dada," and then I closed the door. Before I go on, I just want to say I have never talked about or mentioned anything about ghosts with him around. There isn't one situation I can think of that we have talked about ghosts with him, and even if we did, he's 2.5 years old. Not only that, we haven't even had the death talk with him yet, and I don't think he would just be saying that to try and freak me out. The next day, I asked him if he remembered what he said to me the last night around dinner time at grandparents' place, and he clearly said, "Ghost in my bed?" Well, we all kind of laughed it off, because we all thought maybe he heard it during daycare, during this past Halloween or something. I mean, we really have no idea where he learnt about that. Last night he did it too, pretty much every single night we've been here. Now, to be honest, I get no feeling of bad energy whatsoever from this place, and no one either in my fiancé's or my family have passed too recently. Does anyone have any experience with this kind of situation? Or might I just be looking into it a bit too much? I would love to hear what you all have to say. I have never seen a ghost, but my younger sister has. We used to live above this pub when we were little, and my dad worked there. The pub was about 200 years old at the time, and paranormal investigators were hired and everything. Well, one time my sister was sitting on the floor in the main pub, and just before opening, staring up at the wall and having a conversation with herself. My dad asked her who she was talking to, and she replied, "The man with the big smiley face." We later found out she was talking to the previous landlord when the pub was built back in the mid-1800s, and he had died there. My personal experience was in school, and I was around 7 or 8 at the time. We were making Christmas cards, and it was getting close to the Christmas holidays, and our teaching assistant would take photos of us holding our cards and glue it to our art books. There was my classroom, a middle room, and another classroom on the other side. This middle room was separating the 2 classrooms. Each of us went into the middle room, had our photos taken, and came back. Now, I'm not sure how long after it was until we opened our art books again. It could have been after Christmas or just before, I don't recall. But eventually we opened them up again, and we're all talking about our pictures. However, when I was looking at one of my own, I noticed something behind me. It was a transparent girl floating with her back to me, her hair above shoulder length, and a dress which I assume would have been around knee length, with puffy sleeves, and she had no arms or legs. It really freaked me out, so I went to my teacher and asked her if she saw it. "Oh, it's probably the reflection from another classroom," she told me. But the classroom next door was watching Arthur Christmas when the photo was taken. It was just his face slightly blurred and zoomed in. This reflection also couldn't have been me, as my hair was in a ponytail and I wasn't floating with no limbs. I then went to find the art book at the end of the year, as we had to collect them. I was looking through my book to find this photo to show my parents, but the photo wasn't there. No pages had been ripped out, it was just gone. Only a few of my friends remembered my photo, and their photos were in the book, but where was mine? Like I said, I'm not sure what to consider this, but it still creeps me out to this day. Does anyone know what might have happened? A few months ago, my daughter, who is about to turn 3, started talking about ghosts. At first, I didn't really pay any mind, since she likes Halloween decorations and would always point out the ghosts or pumpkins or witches when she saw them. Then, she began to talk about ghosts without referring to any decor or anything she could visibly point out. Still, I didn't think much of it. About a month or so goes by. She began getting more specific about the ghosts she saw. First, it was a baby ghost that she saw at my mother-in-law's sister's house. She kept pointing at the door at the top of the stairs and insisting there was a baby ghost, which freaked out my mother-in-law's sister, because that had been the room she had a miscarriage in about 20 years prior. Then things got weirder. My cousin Randall passed away suddenly when my daughter was only 12 days old, and she never met him. We don't talk about him much, and I don't have any photos of him around for her to see. And it's not a name she picked up randomly or on TV or anything. Well, about 2 weeks ago, she was rambling on about ghosts in her closet and scaring them away while I was doing laundry. I wasn't paying much attention until she started pointing over at the window and saying, "Look, it's Randall." Immediately I asked her why she said that, and she said his name again. I started trying to ask her more questions regarding Randall, and she was on the next topic and didn't mention it again after that. A few days later, my mother-in-law had told me that while babysitting that day, my daughter told her that she was playing peekaboo with a ghost. My mother-in-law asked if the ghost had a name, and she said it was Randall. I decided to show her a photo of him to see what she had to say, and she was very afraid of him. I thought maybe she was just cranky, so I showed her a photo of one of our dogs, and immediately she perked up and began smiling. I showed her a different photo of him and she began to freak out. After telling a friend of mine, she asked if I had tried showing her a photo of him as a child. So I pulled one up of him about 12 and showed it to my daughter, and she didn't say anything but giggled and walked away. After that, I decided to show one of his old shirts that I have, and immediately she grabbed it out of my hands with excitement and said, "Peekaboo, I see you." I wonder if she's seeing Randall or not. I guess I'll never know. I worked at a rock bar in Scotland for a few years when I was in my early 20s. I experienced paranormal encounters in both the bar I worked in and also the bar's sister establishment. One quiet night I was standing chatting to some regulars when I saw my supervisor, a small, pale, long, black-haired woman, run past the bar. Not even 30 seconds later, she walked up behind me. I asked her why she'd run past the bar. She claimed to have only have gotten back. The bar was based in an old town house, so there was a dumbwaiter installed. When I first started, I walked into the kitchen to let the chefs know there was a check on. I saw a man in overalls run away and past the dumbwaiter. Thinking someone was playing a joke, I walked around to catch them, but there was only a brick wall. We are also very sure that the women's bathroom is haunted, but it didn't feel like a negative presence, as years before I worked there had been overdoses in that same stall. Stalls would be locked, but no one would be inside, and there was a feeling of being watched, and the taps, which you had to press down hard, would come on when no one was there. Finally, my scariest experience was in the bar's sister establishment, aka a rock dive bar. I had never been in it until I was covering a shift there. I went to the cellar to change a keg and had the scariest feeling. My hands were shaking so much I couldn't change the keg, so I swapped with my colleague and took some bin bags out instead. I stood and had a cigarette but couldn't shake the feeling. In this area, unfortunately, years before, a lot of sex workers had lost their lives. I went back inside. When pulling a pint, I noticed I had 3 long, bloody scratch marks down my arm that I should have felt happen, but didn't. Some things I just can't explain away. A little over 4 years ago, my boyfriend and I moved to Greensboro, Georgia, as he was transferred for work. It was supposed to be permanent, but we ended up staying only 3 months or so, and then moved to Statesboro, Georgia, a better location. So he went ahead of me a week early, and they put him up in a hotel. A very old hotel. Yeah, it was pretty crappy, but it was the closest one. So I made the 3.5-hour drive to get there after work, and arrive around 1 a.m. He opens the door half asleep, and tells me he's sorry, but he has to go back to sleep. That's fine, I can entertain myself. I lay in bed on my left side, while my chest and head are facing towards the TV. I am on the left side of the bed, and his snores are so loud it sounds like he's sawing logs to my right. Well, as I lay there flipping through the channels, I keep seeing something move from the corner of my eye. In the little dark hallway leading to the door, honestly, I kept thinking it was my hair, but it wasn't. All of a sudden, a translucent bluish-white head pops out without a body, about 6 feet off the ground. It floats right across the room and vanishes right into the wall. I watched it cross the entire room. While I tell you this was a head, it was a man's head. I could make out the hairline, hair, and the ears, but the face was somewhat blurred. It looked like it had a little old-timey man's ponytail. I could see where the eyes and nose and mouth were, but not in complete detail. It was looking straight ahead at the wall. Thank God he wasn't looking at me. It was in my sight for a good 5 seconds, so there was absolutely no mistaking it. The strangest part was, as soon as it disappeared into the wall, it felt like someone jumped onto the bed. I mean, the second it went into the wall, the whole entire bed bounced. My thighs clapped together and my boyfriend jerked awake and was like, "What the hell?" No lie, it felt like someone ran and jumped onto the bed. I wasn't scared at all, but I had an adrenaline rush and could not go back to sleep for hours. I moved in with my partner a little over a year ago, and ever since, strange and unsettling things have been happening in the house. I've had experiences with the paranormal my entire life. Disembodied voices, unexplained footsteps, and even seeing the ghost of a little girl in one of the houses I grew up in. But this feels different. It's unlike anything I've ever encountered before. Since moving in, there have been times when I'm home alone with just the kids, and I'll hear my partner calling my name from one of the back rooms. The voice sounds exactly like his, down to the tone and cadence, but I know he's at work. It's not just him, though. Whatever this is has mimicked my sister-in-law's voice, my 4-year-old son's voice, and even my 6-month-old's cry. It always comes from a back room in the house, most often my 4-year-old's room. Doors will open and close on their own, and the ceiling fan in my bedroom sometimes starts to move even when it's been off all day. But the most unsettling experience happened in my bed. I felt something sit at the foot of my bed, so clearly that I can see the mattress indent under the weight. I've also felt what feels like a solid human hand touch my feet and legs. It's not a faint brush or a fleeting sensation. It feels deliberate and real. Yet when I look, no one's there. The entire house feels heavy, like the air is thick and oppressive. It's hard to explain, but it's as if the house itself is weighed down by something unseen. This heaviness sets apart from any other paranormal experience I've had. Does anyone know what it could be? And why it feels so strange? This story happened in '97 in Paris, France, when I was working for a French-Mexican family as an au pair. The French father's grandfather had been in World War II, and as he told me, unlike to joke with the nannies, telling them that his grandfather always came around to scare them. So as a joke I would say, "As for me, I don't want him scaring me. He can be around, but he better not communicate." Well, one day I was in the apartment. The family had gone to a small town, as they did every weekend, and the apartment was very old, located in the center of Paris, about 4 blocks from Notre Dame. It was night, and I went to the girl's room. The floors were made of wood that creaked with every step, and I lay down on my side facing the wall. At the head of the bed was a closet with wooden doors. I was dozing off until I heard the closet door open, and I opened my eyes and thought, maybe it's coming from upstairs. I closed my eyes but stayed alert and heard some footsteps that made the floor creak. I stayed completely still, listening, trying to figure out if the sound was coming from inside, outside, or upstairs. Then I felt the edge of the bed sink. I was lying on my back to that part. I felt the sink as if someone had sat down there. I got very, very scared and thought, no, right? I don't want to have a close encounter of the third kind or whatever it's called for ghosts. I started to say the Lord's Prayer, not wanting to turn around because I was so afraid. I didn't want to see anything. Then I felt that something got up and heard the floor creak again, as if it was heading towards the window. We lived on the 4th floor with a small balcony. I heard the steps going in that direction and started to turn very slowly to look. And just when I turned completely, I saw the curtains on the window were moving, but the balcony was closed because it was nighttime and I was asleep. After that, I was never scared again. Sometimes I could feel the presence of the gentleman, but I'd tell him, All is calm, okay? You can be around. I won't bother you. And the little dog, who was a bit grumpy with me, would seem calmer, and he'd leave me alone. Years ago, my sister was visiting my aunt's house in Tijuana with my nephew. For some reason, he wouldn't stop crying the whole time they were there. My sister's husband then had the idea to take a picture of him, but after he snapped the photo, he got very spooked and started taking pictures around the room. Everyone was asking, "What are you doing?" And then he showed us the picture. It showed my sister sitting on the bed with my nephew sitting on his lap. Right above them you can see the figure of another child standing by the bed. The strange thing is, my nephew was the only child in the house that day. The other kids were teenagers and weren't even in that room except for my cousin, who was at the bottom corner watching TV. We're convinced it was a paranormal entity and that it's somehow connected to the bed they're sitting on. Was that the reason my nephew was crying? We're convinced it was. I've always believed in ghosts and the paranormal. I've never been able to see spirits, but I can feel their presence. When my son, who is autistic, was 3, we lived with his dad's sister in a rather large house. I don't know how old the house was, but one day my son and I were home alone and were playing in our room. I was grabbing him by the ankles and flipping him over on the bed. We've been doing this for a while, when all of a sudden my son starts looking past me to the corner of the room, and he looks terrified. I should also mention that he was completely nonverbal until 6. He grabs the blanket and throws it over his head. I pull the blanket off his head and say, "What are you doing, silly?" Still looking past me, and still looking terrified, he puts the blanket back over his head. I pull it off again and ask him what's wrong. He points behind me. I turn around but don't see anything, so I tell him, "Mummy doesn't see anything." He then looks even more scared and puts the blanket back on his head. Again I pull it off and this time ask him what he sees. He makes a motion like to demonstrate someone hanging and making a face with his tongue hanging out. This time I don't let him put the blanket back over his head. I tell him to wait a minute. I turn around in the direction he's been looking and say out loud, "Look, I understand you're probably trying to communicate with my son because you realize he can see you. But he knows I can't see you, so you're scaring him, and he's autistic. I need you to leave." I watch my son's gaze follow from that corner of the room all the way to the door. Then he looks back at me with a smile, claps his hands, and is ready to play again. If I hadn't been a believer before that day, I definitely would have been after that.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed tonight's spine-chilling camping tales. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to bring you more heart-pounding horror stories soon. Stay safe, stay curious, and until next time, keep the campfire burning and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe the channel.